They were not gods, yet they ruled the fate of every human soul trapped beneath their invisible dominion. Ancient texts whispered that these beings shaped reality itself. But to what end? Why did they hide the true structure of the cosmos? And what secret could shatter their prison forever? Stay, and you will uncover the truth buried behind their silent reign. From the moment ancient mystics first dared to gaze beyond the limits of the visible heavens, they spoke of a cosmic architecture far older than any star. They claimed that humanity lived not in an open universe, but inside a vast multi-layered construct, a kind of spiritual labyrinth built to obscure the true source of creation. At its gates, at its borders, and at every hidden turning stood the same silent wardens, the Archons. These beings were neither divine nor mortal. They were intermediaries, engineers of perception, sculptors of illusion, and guardians of a truth so devastating that even speaking it aloud was said to rupture the soul. In the earliest accounts, their presence did not begin with thunder or flame. Instead, the Archons emerged quietly, woven into the fabric of human existence like a shadow that preceded the light. They governed the spheres that encased the human soul, layers of reality stacked like nested shells, each one thicker, heavier, and more impenetrable than the last. To those who perceived them, the Archons appeared not as demons to be feared, nor deities to be worshipped, but as wardens of a prison no human could see. Their power lay in their subtlety. They did not chain bodies. They chained perception. At first, mystics believed they were protectors. After all, the outermost realm was described as chaotic, raw, unfiltered creation, a realm where mortal minds could shatter. Perhaps the Archons stood as buffers, shielding humanity from the cosmic storm. But then came the paradox that unsettled millennia of tradition. If the Archons were guardians, why did they seem to interfere with human ascent? Why did every attempt to pierce the veil meet resistance? Why did visions warp, dreams collapse, and insights dissolve the moment they neared the boundaries of the outer spheres? One sect of sages claimed to have uncovered the first clue. They argued that the Archons were not appointed, but manufactured. According to their writings, the universe had once existed in a state of pure and fluid consciousness. There were no prisons, no layers, no cosmic hierarchy. Souls drifted freely, merging with the source of all things. But then, an event occurred, one so catastrophic it fractured the unity of existence and demanded a new order. From the wreckage of that ancient collapse, the Archons were forged. They were not guardians by choice, but instruments shaped with a singular purpose: containment. Yet the nature of what they contained remained the greatest riddle. Some believed it was humanity's potential, claiming the Archons feared what mankind could become if freed from the illusions of the material realm. Others insisted the true prisoner was not humanity at all, but a cosmic truth so powerful that revealing it would unravel the structure of reality. If that were true, the Archons were less jailers and more maintenance workers, preserving a universe that would collapse without their vigilance. Still, scattered testimonies spoke of individuals who slipped through the Archons' grasp. They described piercing the realm of the first sphere, glimpsing a brilliance that felt both alien and intimately familiar. These individuals returned haunted, claiming that everything humanity perceived was curated, filtered, adjusted, as though every thought were permitted only within approved boundaries. Their accounts spread like wildfire, challenging ancient doctrines and inspiring a secret movement dedicated to confronting the Archons directly. As whispers grew, fear followed. If the Archons truly shaped the realm of human experience, what else had they altered? Were memories authentic? Were beliefs truly ours? Or had every civilization unknowingly marched to the rhythm of their design? The deeper thinkers trembled at another possibility. Perhaps the Archons were not cruel. Perhaps they believed their prison was necessary. And if so, necessary for what? Those who sought answers soon discovered that every path, every ritual, every attempt to ascend led not to clarity, but to interference. Symbols twisted, revelations inverted. The closer anyone came to understanding, the more aggressively the Archons enforced their invisible laws. And then came the first disappearance, an ascetic who claimed he had found a breach in the cosmic shell. One night he vanished, leaving behind only a final message carved into stone. They do not guard us. They guard something from us. A shadow of dread fell over his followers, yet curiosity burned hotter. Whatever truth he found, whatever breach he crossed, they vowed to follow. They believed the Archons had overstepped. They believed mankind deserved to know. And so they prepared for their own ascent, unaware that the moment they began, the first Archon had already taken notice. If this journey into the hidden architecture of the soul fascinates you, subscribe so you do not miss the unraveling of this cosmic conspiracy. And tell me in the comments, do you believe the Archons protect humanity or imprison it? The disciples of the vanished ascetic gathered in secrecy, their hearts divided between fear and the intoxicating call of forbidden knowledge. They met in abandoned temples, in caves lit only by trembling flames, and in forgotten sanctuaries carved beneath ancient cities. Each believed that the Archons were watching, that every whispered theory drifted upward into unseen ears. And yet none of them stopped. The disappearance of their master had not crushed their resolve, it had ignited it. For if the Archons truly guarded something from humanity, then discovering that truth became a sacred duty. Their first challenge was understanding the architecture of the spheres. Ancient texts described them vaguely, concentric realms layered like shells around the earth, each governed by an Archon who enforced a specific distortion of reality. One sphere manipulated memory, another controlled desire, another shaped fear. The sages believed that these distortions were not side effects of cosmic order, but deliberate mechanisms designed to keep the human soul subdued. If someone attempted to transcend, the distortions intensified, disorienting the seeker until they surrendered and fell back into the ordinary world. But the disciples discovered inconsistencies. Old manuscripts written thousands of years apart spoke of the same distortions but described them in subtly different forms. It was as if the Archons adjusted their methods over generations, evolving their illusions to match the growth of human understanding. This realization shook the group deeply. If the Archons adapted, then they were not static guardians. They were strategists. Driven by this insight, the disciples began reenacting the final rituals their master had performed before vanishing. These rituals combined breath, sound, and symbolic geometry to weaken the distortive effects of the first sphere. Many failed. Some fell into madness, overwhelmed by visions too fragmented to decipher. A few swore they felt an overwhelming presence watching them, pressing against their thoughts like an invisible weight. But one disciple, a quiet woman named Lysa, succeeded. Lysa claimed she pierced the first layer for a brief moment. She described a realm where perception felt frighteningly precise, where nothing shifted or wavered the way it did in ordinary consciousness. There were no distortions, no internal echoes. Everything appeared sharply defined, as though her mind had been stripped of filters she never realized she possessed. But the moment she tried to move deeper, she felt a pressure unlike anything she had ever known. Not physical, not emotional, but something that targeted her very sense of identity. It pressed inward, compressing her thoughts until she snapped back into the material world with a scream. Her return shook the group, not because of the pain she experienced, but because of the last thing she whispered before losing consciousness. They noticed me. For the first time, the disciples faced the possibility that their ascetic leader had not merely vanished, he had been taken. Or worse, he had ascended to a place where humanity was never meant to tread. Lysa's vision confirmed that the Archons were actively monitoring the boundaries of the spheres, responding to intrusions with overwhelming force. And yet, embedded in her brief success was hope. The architecture could be breached. The distortions could be overcome. What haunted them most was Lysa's second revelation. During her moment of clarity beyond the first sphere, she claimed to have seen traces of something monumental, like the faint silhouette of a colossal structure hidden behind layers of cosmic mist. It did not resemble a temple, a palace, or any spiritual realm described in sacred texts. It looked engineered, constructed, designed with purpose. And if such a megastructure existed beyond the spheres, then the Archons were not merely jailers of the human soul. They were curators of access to that impossible realm. Whatever lay beyond it was the secret they guarded with relentless vigilance. The disciples understood then that their master had not simply escaped the Archon's grasp. He had reached the threshold of that hidden architecture. And now, if they wished to uncover what he learned, they would have to follow his path, even if it meant provoking the Archons into direct confrontation. A confrontation no human had ever survived. Lysa's fragile awakening changed everything. What had once been philosophical speculation became an urgent and dangerous mission. The disciples realized that breaching the first sphere was not simply difficult. It was an act of war against the very custodians of reality. Yet the glimpse of the hidden megastructure haunted them so deeply that retreat became impossible. If the Archons had engineered something beyond the spheres, then that structure was the true heart of their dominion. And perhaps it was the key to understanding why humanity had been shackled since its earliest memory. The group divided into 3 circles. The first gathered ancient manuscripts scattered across continents, seeking variations of cosmological diagrams long dismissed as mystical abstractions. The second focused on reconstructing the ascetics' final sequences, refining the ritual to reduce the psychic pressure that had nearly crushed Lysa. The third, a smaller and more reckless faction, believed that provoking the Archons directly might reveal their intentions. They meditated not to transcend, but to attract, to force a reaction, to see what form the jailers would take when confronting intruders face to face. Their recklessness bore fruit, though none would have chosen that word afterward. One night, during a synchronized meditation, the reckless faction fell into a collective trance. Their bodies remained upright, eyes open but unseeing, while their minds drifted beyond the threshold of ordinary vision. Hours later, they woke screaming, one by one, each convulsing as if their thoughts were tearing themselves apart. When they finally stabilized, their testimonies were fractured but unmistakably aligned. The Archons had responded, not with physical forms, but with geometric patterns so vast and intricate that the human mind could only translate them into overwhelming terror. A presence radiated through those patterns, cold, meticulous, ancient beyond imagination. It did not speak, but its intention was unmistakable. Return, cease, forget. The disciples gathered to interpret the experience, but a new problem emerged. The reckless faction began forgetting fragments of their own memories. At first, it was small, a missing childhood detail, a misplaced name. Then it grew. Entire chapters of their lives vanished, as if erased cleanly, without trauma. It was the exact distortion associated with the Archon, who ruled the sphere of memory. This revelation confirmed a horrifying truth. The Archons could reach into the material world. Their distortions were not confined to metaphysical layers. They bled downward. In the midst of panic, Lysa intervened with a calm that startled the others. She confessed that during her brief moment beyond the first sphere, she had felt an intuitive map forming in her mind, not in images, but in instinct. A directional pull, a sense of where the structure lay hidden beyond the layers. It was not a place one could reach physically, but the body could be trained into a resonance that aligned with the architecture's frequency. If their master had succeeded, then he must have found that resonance. Armed with this new perspective, the disciples intensified their training. They learned to synchronize breath with heartbeat, to silence internal dialogue, to withstand distortions without surrendering to fear. And slowly, patterns began to emerge. The distortions attacked specific vulnerabilities: guilt, doubt, longing. By confronting these shadows, the disciples discovered that the Archons' power was strongest where human identity was weakest. They had weaponized human imperfection. Weeks became months. The rituals evolved into precise sequences, capable of stabilizing consciousness long enough to breach the first sphere consistently. One by one, the disciples reached the same unfiltered realm Lysa had glimpsed. And one by one, they felt the presence pushing back, harder each time, as though the Archons sensed their growing momentum. But the greatest breakthrough came unexpectedly. During one session, Lysa reached not the first realm, but something deeper. She screamed, a sound sharp enough to shatter the silence of the cavern, then collapsed. When she awoke, trembling and drenched in sweat, she uttered a single sentence that froze the entire group. "There are not 7 spheres. There are 8. This revelation shattered centuries of esoteric tradition. The existence of an 8th sphere implied a hidden layer, concealed even from the ancient scribes who recorded the earliest cosmological maps. Why hide a sphere? And what purpose could it serve? Lysa could barely describe it. She sensed a barrier thicker than anything she had encountered, not defensive but suppressive, designed to compress something vast into something small, something dormant. The disciples now understood why their master had disappeared. He had breached the hidden sphere. And the Archons, the jailers of the human soul, were guarding not merely a boundary, but a secret buried beneath the architecture itself. The revelation of the hidden 8th sphere spread among the disciples like a silent wildfire. It dismantled every assumption, every diagram, every inherited belief they had relied upon. If the 8th sphere truly existed, then the ancient cosmologies were not incomplete by accident. They had been edited. Someone or something had deliberately erased the most crucial layer of all. And only one question remained: what was powerful enough and meticulous enough to rewrite the spiritual architecture of humanity itself? The disciples' unity began to fracture. Some believed the 8th sphere was a prison, a containment chamber for a cosmic force too dangerous to roam free. Others argued the opposite. It was humanity that had been locked inside, cut off from a forgotten birthright. Still others whispered that the 8th sphere might be a vault, protecting a fragment of knowledge the Archons feared. Whatever the truth, they knew this hidden layer was the true battlefield, the place where their master had vanished, the place where the megastructure Lysa glimpsed must intersect with the cosmic order. Driven by purpose, they rebuilt their rituals from the ground up. The sequences that once allowed them to merely pierce the first layer were no longer enough. They needed to withstand distortions on a scale no human had dared face. Their training became harsher, their nights longer. They meditated until their limbs went numb and their minds trembled from pressure. They exposed themselves to illusions crafted by their own fears. They confronted memories the Archons used as weapons. The weakest among them broke. The strongest endured. And in this crucible of suffering, something extraordinary happened. Patterns emerged, subtle at first and unmistakable. The distortions did not behave randomly. They followed rhythms as though governed by a cosmic metronome. The disciples charted the frequencies, tracing them vertically through their visions, and discovered a terrifying truth. The distortions were not barriers. They were surveillance systems. The Archons used them to monitor transcendence attempts in real time, adjusting their defenses the moment a seeker neared forbidden territory. This was not spiritual evolution. It was spiritual policing. Lysa, whose sensitivity to the hidden architecture continued to sharpen, made the next breakthrough. She discovered that the distortions weakened at rare intervals, moments when the spheres aligned in a pattern so precise that it resembled an opening and eclipse of consciousness. These intervals were brief, lasting no more than a few heartbeats, but during them the Archon's attention seemed to waver. It was in one such moment that she felt the pull again, the silent compass pointing toward the megastructure beyond the 7th sphere. But something else happened during her trance. She sensed another presence. Not an Archon, not a distortion, but something faint like the echo of a human consciousness stretched thin across dimensions. A voice without sound, a shadow without form. It whispered not in words, but in intent. Come deeper. Lisa awakened shaking, convinced beyond doubt that the presence belonged to their master. But if he was truly calling from beyond the hidden sphere, then he had not been destroyed. He had been absorbed, integrated into a realm no human was designed to survive. And for him to reach back across the layers meant that he had discovered something monumental, something that required them to follow. The disciples prepared for their most dangerous descent yet. Using Lysa's compass and the aligned interval, they attempted a synchronized traversal. The moment they crossed the first sphere, the pressure intensified. By the third, several screamed. By the fourth, two collapsed unconscious, their minds overwhelmed by labyrinthine distortions. But the remaining few pressed on, tethered to Lysa's lead. And then it happened. They felt the eighth sphere. It was not vast, it was crushing. A dense, suffocating pressure that compressed thought, identity, memory, and will into a single unbearable point. It was not a realm but a shell, a boundary forged to conceal, not contain. Beyond it, for a fleeting heartbeat, they saw it, the silhouette of the megastructure, impossibly large, stretching across a horizon that did not belong to any physical dimension. But before they could understand what they were seeing, the pressure surged. A wave of force radiated outward, shattering their focus, ripping their consciousness back into their bodies. Most landed gasping, trembling, crying. Lysa did not. She remained motionless. For several agonizing minutes, they believed she had died. But then her eyes snapped open, filled not with fear, but with knowledge so vast and terrible that none could bear her gaze. And with a trembling voice, she whispered, "The Archons. They are not the jailers. They are the locks." What lies beyond the eighth sphere is the true prison. A silence heavier than dread settled over the group. If the Archons were locks, then who or what were they guarding? The moment Lysa spoke, the air around the disciples thickened with a dread they had no vocabulary for. Everything they thought they knew about the Archons, the spheres, the megastructure collapsed under the weight of her revelation. The Archons were not tyrants sitting on thrones of cosmic authority. They were mechanisms. They were keys, seals, coded guardians built with a singular purpose: prevent humanity from crossing into the realm beyond the eighth sphere. But who designed such guardians? And what force was so catastrophic that reality itself had to be engineered to keep it contained? Lysa was the only one who had remained conscious long enough to glimpse what lay past the eighth sphere, but even she struggled to articulate it. Her words came slowly, broken by shivers that rippled through her spine. She described a darkness that was not absence but intent, a presence that pressed against the boundaries of the megastructure like a mind scraping against glass. It was alive, aware, watching, not passive, not dormant, waiting, and for reasons she couldn't yet explain, it had noticed her. As she spoke, the disciples realized the implications. Their master had not simply vanished during his descent. He had been touched by whatever existed beyond the lock. That force had sought him, pierced him, taken him. And now it was testing the boundaries of the eighth sphere again. Lysa had become its next point of contact, and perhaps its next target. The group debated their next steps. Some insisted they retreat, seal their rituals, and leave the mystery buried. Others argued that knowing the eighth sphere existed meant they were already exposed, already marked. Lysa, however, felt a new kind of pull, stronger than the silent compass, but far more dangerous. She described it as an invitation wrapped in threat, a summons. She sensed that the entity beyond the eighth sphere was probing her memories, peeling back layers, searching for something familiar, perhaps her master's presence still echoing in her mind. That night, during a rare moment of stillness, Lysa experienced a second contact. This time, she saw more than shadows. She saw a shape leaking through the cracks of the megastructure, vast, shifting, neither physical nor spiritual, but something built from consciousness itself. An intelligence so old that the Archons, compared to it, felt like newly forged tools. It whispered a message that pulsed like a heartbeat inside her skull. The locks are weakening. The disciples knew then that they were running out of time. If the entity's influence continued to seep through the eighth sphere, humanity would face something their myths were never designed to warn them about. They gathered their fragmented research, the diagrams, the resonance maps, and the forbidden chants, piecing together a plan that bordered on madness. They would attempt a full descent into the eighth sphere. Not into the realm beyond. None believed they could survive that, but into the shell itself. Into the lock. If they could understand the mechanism, they might reinforce it, or, if necessary, disable it entirely. But there was a risk none of them voiced aloud. If the Archons were truly locks, then tampering with them might trigger an awakening. Or worse, a release. The preparation for the descent consumed their final reserves of strength. They calibrated their chants to new frequencies, tuned their breath to match Lysa's internal resonance, and linked their minds through synchronized meditation. One by one, they felt their consciousness lifting, sliding out of their bodies like threads drawn from a loom. The traversal began smoother than before. The first spheres shimmered past, their distortions weaker, now as though distracted. By the time they reached the seventh sphere, Lysa realized the terrible truth. The Archons were not resisting. They were withdrawing. Whatever lay beyond the eighth sphere had drawn their attention inward. And then they entered the lock. It was not a place. It was a sensation compression, silence, static, layered like the tight coils of a serpent. Every thought they held was weighed, measured, judged. Lysa felt her memories scraped again, this time by the Archons themselves, as though verifying her identity, assessing whether she belonged within their mechanism. Her pulse thundered. Her breath vanished. Yet she continued, dragging the group with her through sheer force of will. At the core of the lock, they finally saw it. The Archon. Not a being of light or shadow, but an engine of consciousness built from geometric principles too perfect to exist in mundane reality. It hovered, humming, shifting through impossible angles, each movement rewriting the space around it. It was beautiful and terrifying divine machinery. And then it turned toward them. The Archon's attention felt like a blade pressed against the mind. It analyzed them with ruthless precision, peeling through their intentions. Lysa tried to speak, but the Archon communicated first, not with voice, but with clarity that shattered her thoughts. You seek to understand the lock, but the lock exists because the prisoner must never wake. As the weight of this truth settled upon them, the sphere trembled violently. Something was pushing from the other side, something vast, something that recognized Lysa's presence and reached toward her again. The lock began to crack. If you're still here, follow the channel so you don't miss what happens next. And tell me in the comments, do you think the prisoner should remain sealed or be released? The fracture in the eighth sphere widened with a soundless violence that none of them could endure without feeling their consciousness warp. The Archon's radiance flickered, its geometric form distorting as the pressure from the other side intensified. Lysa felt the entity's presence surge toward the breach, its awareness sweeping across her mind like a shadow stretched by an unseen sun. It was no longer testing the barriers. It was entering. The disciples, suspended within the lock, struggled to maintain their cohesion. Their thoughts, once synchronized, now splintered under the force dragging them toward the rift. Some felt crushing dread. Others felt an intoxicating pull. Lysa alone felt both terror and recognition intertwined. Whatever slept beyond the lock knew her, and its awakening was accelerating. The Archon reconfigured itself, its angles collapsing into a single spear of light aimed at the fracture. It compressed thousands of patterns into a single pulse, a desperate reinforcement meant to hold the breach intact. For a moment, reality steadied, the pressure eased, and then the entity pushed back with a force that made the eighth sphere ripple like thin metal under a hammer blow. Lysa understood then that the Archon was weakening, not because of the entity, but because of the disciples themselves. Their presence, their intrusion, destabilized the lock. They were foreign variables inside a mechanism designed to operate in perfect isolation. She felt a cold realization coil through her chest. By seeking the truth, they had become part of the threat. The Archon turned its attention to her again. A message pierced her mind, this time edged with urgency. The prisoner knows your voice. It will not stop until it finds you. Lysa staggered. The others reached for her, but their hands passed through her form as the sphere distorted around her. The lock was reconfiguring, pushing the disciples out before more harm was done. She tried to resist, to hold them together, but the Archon released a resonant wave that tore their consciousness apart like petals in a storm. One by one, they were forced back through the descending spheres, expelled for their own survival. But not Lysa. The lock held her. No chose her. She felt herself pulled toward the fracture. The entity's awareness wrapped around her, a colossal intelligence trying to speak through the narrow gap. Her senses twisted. Shapes without form emerged. Voices without sound echoed. She could not interpret them, but she felt their meaning. Hunger, memory, the faint outline of a question that pressed against her soul. Who opened the gate? Lysa's thoughts spiraled as she tried to comprehend the enormity behind the message. The prisoner had not been asleep. It had been watching through the lock, tracing any vibration, any shift. Her master's descent had awakened its curiosity. Her own resonance had awakened its interest. And now, with the lock trembling, it saw opportunity. She forced her mind to focus. If the Archon had chosen to keep her inside the lock, it was not to sacrifice her. It was because she was the one capable of stabilizing the breach. Her resonance, the anomaly that separated her from her peers, was not an accident. It was a compatible frequency, a counterpattern capable of interacting with the prisoner without collapsing. The Archon's form brightened, shifting into a structure that mirrored human posture, a shape she could recognize. It extended a single line of light toward her, a conduit. She hesitated for the briefest moment. Then she reached. The connection ignited a flood of information. She saw how the megastructure had been built, not by gods or gods masquerading as machines, but by a civilization erased from all known histories. A civilization that had imprisoned something they could not destroy. The spheres were chains, the Archons were locks, and humanity had been born inside the cage without knowing it. The prisoner roared silent yet overwhelming as the conduit stabilized. Lysa felt the strain tear at her consciousness, but she held. The Archon fed its pattern through her, using her as a stabilizing anchor. Together, they formed a counterfrequency, a barrier that began to seal the widening breach. The entity pushed harder. Its awareness swelled, filling the sphere with a suffocating presence. Lysa felt her thoughts fray. Memories dissolved into static. Her body, far away in the physical world, trembled on the floor of the sanctum as the disciples watched helplessly. Still she held. The lock pulsed. The barrier hardened. The fracture narrowed, but the prisoner was not finished. It surged one final time, a tidal wave of consciousness, and its full attention smashed against Lysa's mind. She screamed, not in sound, but in thought. A memory was torn from her. A single, specific memory. Her master's final words before he vanished. "Do not follow me." She understood now. He had not descended seeking knowledge. He had descended trying to save her. The prisoner's interest had begun with her long before she realized it. She pushed everything she had into the conduit: fear, will, identity. The Archon amplified it. The sphere convulsed. And with a shattering wave of light, the fracture sealed. Silence fell. The pressure vanished. The prisoner retreated. The lock was restored. Lisa collapsed, her consciousness drifting in weightless exhaustion. The Archon dimmed, its form returning to its original geometry. Before fading into its dormant configuration, it sent her one final message, faint as an echo. The seal holds, but the prisoner will remember you. Lisa felt herself lifted, drawn back through the spheres. Her consciousness descended in a slow spiral until gravity returned. Her eyes opened in the sanctum, met by terrified disciples who had thought her lost forever. She breathed, barely. She spoke, softly. "It is sealed?" "For now." They gathered around her, unsure whether to rejoice or fear what came next. Lysa gazed upward, through the stones of the sanctum, through the sky, through the unseen spheres above. Somewhere beyond the eighth sphere, something ancient had learned her name, and it would not forget.